Say you want to draw every kind of flower. How would you go about doing that?
What is and isn't a flower? What does every kind mean? Like, what makes one kind of flower distinct from another kind? And finally, where do you start? As the first video in what is hopefully a series, I want to begin by clarifying these questions. Let's start with the easiest question to answer. What is a flower? A flower is the part of a flowering plant which forms fruit when mature. Flowering plants form the clade Angiosperm, from the Greek words angion, meaning container, and sperma, meaning seed, because they enclose their seeds in an ovary. Angiosperms erupted in the fossil record in the early Cretaceous, about 140 million years ago, and now make up the vast majority of the diversity in land plants. Speaking of land plants, or the Embryophyta, it's important to clarify what exactly isn't a flower. Check out this phylogenetic tree of the Embryophyta. The first divergence is between vascular and non-vascular plants. The bryophytes are all non-vascular plants, that is, plants that have no vasculature to transport water and nutrients, and rely on diffusion to move these resources across their bodies. Non-vascular plants like mosses and liverworts must cling to wet surfaces for water and can't grow into stone or earth without suffocating or starving. Vascular plants, on the other hand, grow roots to seek water and stems to reach for sunlight and oxygen, and transport these across their bodies, which are often much larger and more complex. The next divergence is that of the spermatophytes. Spermatophytes form seeds, structures which put a protective coat around the plant embryo and often have a nutrient reserve inside to help it germinate. Plants like ferns and lycophytes are vascular, but they reproduce with spores instead of seeds. Finally, we come to the division between gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymno comes from the Greek word meaning naked, so as opposed to angiosperms, their seeds are exposed and form on the surface of scales or leaves. Gymnosperms include the conifers, cycads, and ginkgos, and they do not form flowers nor typically fruit, though a few species have developed fruit-like adaptations, like yew and juniper berries, that form without flowers. Although all these plants are beautiful, and I have dedicated a painting to them, they are not flowers. We are interested only in the angiosperms, which are the only plants which form flowers. Next, what does every kind mean? Well, we could go by species, which typically delineates organisms by whether two individuals can produce viable offspring or not. That would be the most rigorous system. I could really make sure I wasn't missing a flower, but okay, look at this flower, the meadow buttercup. Now look at this one, the creeping buttercup. Are these really different kinds of flower? I mean, they don't interbreed, they're genetically distinct, they grow in different soils and so on. Does that make them different kinds of flower, though? Look, I'm not even saying they're exactly visually identical either. They do have minor morphological differences, but I wouldn't feel like I was missing a kind of flower if I drew one and not the other. They're both buttercups. I feel safe counting them as drawn if I draw a buttercup. So let's try looking a little higher into groupings of species. Historically, the term Ordo Naturalis, or natural order, was used by botanists like Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy, to divide plants into natural groups. Granted, there really is nothing essentially natural or correct about such an ordering. It's just what early European botanists like Linnaeus and de Jussieu came up with, and carries many markers of what medieval and post-medieval era Europeans saw as important divisions and groupings. Botanist Stuart Max Walters, in his 1960 article, The Shaping of Angiosperm Taxonomy, points out a few important patterns that arise as a consequence of this. It's a great read, by the way, and it should be linked in the description. For example, families with species dominant in Europe tend to be much larger, having been published much earlier, whereas those of tropical origin or otherwise recently published families tend to be smaller, sometimes to the point of containing just one single genus.
It also means that older families are more finely divided, with many smaller genera that aren't particularly different from one another. So drawing every genera might run into the same problem as I had with species, whereas every family may be closer to what I'm looking for. Still, despite the biases, these Ordo Naturalis remain present in the shape of modern taxonomic families for a simple reason: convenience. It was simply convenient to keep using these groupings as taxonomy evolved rather than upend the whole thing along with all the work people put into them over the years. So for convenience, I will use them also. Let's say that every kind means at least one representative species from each family. And of course, in the case of very large and old families, containing flowers we definitely not call the same kind, I will definitely draw more than one species.
Now we come to the question which caused me the most strife while researching this project. Where do I start? I could go alphabetically, A to Z, and initially I was going to, but as I researched, it felt increasingly disjointed. I was jumping between completely dislocated branches of the tree of life, and I found myself having to re-explain relations with each jump. I mean, flowers are all related, right? All living things are. Shouldn't there be some sort of way to structure that relation in a sequential order? Let's go back to that phylogenetic tree from earlier. Now let me show you how many species are in each leaf. It's an odd structure, no? After each divergence, it seems that one branch diversified far, far more than the other, even though both branches diverged at the same time, and the organisms in each clade have had the same amount of time to diversify and speciate. This pattern is a product of what is known as key innovations in evolutionary biology. To explain this, imagine a population of organisms reproducing generation by generation. Here, I've represented each population with the dot, with time moving forward to the right, the y-axis representing phenotypic divergence, and the lines connecting the dots showing ancestral and descendant relationships. As a population reproduces, mutations cause different traits to arise. Most of these traits are disadvantageous, so populations with these traits tend to go extinct. Occasionally, though, a new trait develops which is useful, say the forming of vasculature or the forming of seeds, and the resultant population are able to exploit new ecological niches and quickly diversify to fill them, resulting in a huge amount of speciations in the branch with adaptation. The populations that did not inherit the adaptation continues to mutate, but without the adaptation, it does not speciate quite as much as it cannot access any of those new niches. It's important to remember that this is not always a hard and fast rule, however. Environmental changes and extinction events, among other things, can cause this pattern to break. Still, this mechanism explains the difference in diversity we see in the phylogenetic tree from earlier. From trees like this, we can differentiate more basal branches, that is, ones that are closer to the base, from less basal ones, and infer that traits present in the less basal branch but absent in the more basal one were perhaps also absent in the common ancestors of both clades. Biologists construct these trees from both the fossil record and with molecular phylogeny, sequencing the DNA of different plants, so our understanding of the tree of life has changed a lot over the past few centuries, and especially the past few decades, as scientists have worked to find more of this evidence. So, with this pattern in mind, is there a complete phylogenetic tree of all flowering plants? One we could use to order all flowers from most to least basal? The answer is yes. The APG4 system, released in 2015 by the Angiosperm Phylogeny Group, an international collaboration between botanists, is the latest of 4 updates to a classification system started in 1998 that was intended to standardize and unify plant taxonomy based on the latest technology and molecular phylogenetics. And it's just beautiful. It really satisfies some deep human itch in me to find order in the chaos of the universe. And it'll be especially handy for this video series. I'll be able to rely on the latest in modern flower research to draw every flower in historical order, moving forwards in the fossil record with each adaptation. So, I'll see you next time for the most basal extant flower, Ambarella.
By the way, I'm not a botanist or a scientist or a historian or anything like that, so I'm bound to get some stuff wrong. Um, and I really do hope that people come and correct me when that inevitably happens. And also, I'm just one person, so I don't expect these to come out very quickly. Probably, um, I'm not even going to make a promise as to how often they'll come out. I'll see you next time. Uh, Bye, I love you.